Hi, this is Len Furman, the sports time traveler, taking you back into the past to experience another great sporting event from long ago. This episode is titled The Maple Leafs Go for the Hat Trick, my virtual experience of the 1964 Stanley Cup Finals. We start with an introduction from the sports time traveler. 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to go see a hockey match in real life in Toronto. The experience was unlike anything I had ever witnessed while attending a sporting event. The atmosphere was electric. The place was packed. Not a seat in the house was empty. From the player warm-ups right through to the conclusion of the match, the crowd noise was loud, very loud. When the Maple Leafs won it in overtime, delirium set in amongst the fans. It's what I would have expected had the Maple Leafs just won the Stanley Cup. But this was a preseason match. I left Toronto the next day thinking these are the most incredible sports fans I've ever seen. I also felt very sorry for these Maple Leaf loyalists. They hadn't seen their team make it to the NHL Conference Finals in this century, and they had not experienced a team that made it to the Stanley Cup Finals since 1967. But there was a time when Toronto ruled. In the early 1960s, the Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup in 1962 and 1963. In 1964, they finished in third place in the league, but knocked off the number one Canadiens in 7 games to reach the finals again. This had me intrigued. Could the Maple Leafs pull off the hat trick and win 3 consecutive Stanley Cups? Naturally, as the sports time traveler, I had to go back in time, precisely 60 years, to see exactly what happened. Toronto, April 27th, 1964. I'm here in Toronto virtually in 1964, where 2 nights ago, the 7th game of the Stanley Cup Finals took place between the Detroit Red Wings and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Neither team was favored to reach the Stanley Cup Finals this year. The Maple Leafs, with a record of 33, 25, and 12, had finished third in the league, and the Red Wings, with a record of just 30, 29, and 11, had come in fourth. Both teams were well behind the Montreal Canadiens at 36, 21, and 13, and the Chicago Blackhawks at 36, 22, and 12. But both the Maple Leafs and the Red Wings won Game 7s on the road in the semifinals, and as a result, the teams faced each other in the Stanley Cup Finals for the second straight season. The Maple Leafs are the 2-time defending champions, while the Red Wings made it to the Stanley Cup Finals as the 4th-place team for the 3rd time in this decade. But the Red Wings have not won the Cup since 1955. In the video below from YouTube that I have in the Substack article, you can see the highlights from the series. And here is my commentary with the timestamps from the video. At 1 minute on the video, watch the Red Wings legend 36-year-old Gordie Howe score on a long slap shot to give Detroit a 2-1 lead in the middle of the first period of Game 1 in Toronto. At 1:10 on the tape, in the second period of Game 1, Howe takes the puck in his own zone and skates past everyone for a clear shot on goal from short range. But 39-year-old Maple Leafs goalie Johnny Bower saves it. Detroit still leads 2-1 after 2 periods. At 1:30 on the tape, George Armstrong scores for Toronto to tie the match at 2 with 16 minutes left to play. At 1:40 on the tape, we see a frustrated Red Wings goalie, the great Terry Sawchuck, take his stick and flip the puck into the stands. At 1:50 on the tape, with 4 minutes to play, the Maple Leafs are shorthanded, but Bob Pulford gets the puck on a breakaway. Gordie Howe tries to chase him down, but Pulford is able to get off his shot and scores. The Maple Leafs take Game 1 by a score of 3-2. In Game 2, the Red Wings take a 3-1 lead after 2 periods. Red Kelly scores for the Maple Leafs with 8 minutes to play to cut the lead to 3-2. At 5:30 on the tape, the Maple Leafs have the puck deep in the Red Wings zone with just under a minute to play. Watch carefully as Gerry Ehman ties the match with just 43 seconds to play. Game 2 goes into overtime. At 6:15 on the tape, almost 8 minutes into overtime, watch as Gordie Howe has the puck behind the goal line and centers it for Larry Jeffrey, who scores the game winner. The series was now tied at 1 game apiece as the venue moved to Detroit for games 3 and 4. Detroit took game 3 by a score of 4-3, but Toronto tied up the series with a 4-2 win in game 4. Game 5 in Toronto was another one-goal match, won by the Red Wings 2-1. That put the Red Wings ahead 3-2 with an opportunity to wrap up the Stanley Cup at home in Game 6. You can actually watch the entire Game 6 match on a YouTube video I found that I've put in the written version of the Substack article. This YouTube video had only 24 views when I found it. Here's my commentary on the Game 6 video. At the 1 hour, 1 minute, and 25 second mark on the tape, watch with 4 minutes remaining in the second period and the match tied at 2, as Gordie Howe gets the puck at the center line and takes it all the way in and scores. The crowd goes wild as Detroit is now ahead 3-2. If they can hold on, they will win the Stanley Cup. But with 2 minutes to play in the second period, the Maple Leafs tie it up on a Billy Harris goal. The third period is scoreless, and the match goes to overtime. At the hour and 56 minute and 20 second mark on the tape, you can watch the overtime starting. A Detroit goal will win the Stanley Cup for the Red Wings. A Toronto goal will force a Game 7 at Maple Leafs Garden. At the 1 hour and 58 minute and 35 second mark on the tape, just less than 2 minutes into overtime, the Maple Leafs' Bob Pulford gets the puck just over the blue line and sends a long slap shot flying. It's a goal. The Maple Leafs win. The incredible part of this is that Pulford had left the ice on a stretcher earlier in the match. In the April 24th, 1964 Toronto Star, Pulford said, "I heard something pop as I faced off against Howe. The pop was from his ankle." Red Burnett of the Toronto Star reported, "Pulford collapsed moments after stopping an Alex Delvecchio shot from the point. He tried to get up under his own steam, but had to use the stretcher. Yet Pulford returned to the match in time to slap home the winner in overtime." So the Maple Leafs would have a chance to win their third straight Stanley Cup at home on Saturday night, April 25th, 1964. An ad in the Toronto Star the day before the match indicated that standing room tickets were still available for Game 7 at $1.50 and $2.50. An article in the Toronto Star on the day of the match pointed out the possibility that if Game 7 went into overtime like Game 6 and play continued until midnight, the match might have to be stopped due to the prohibition on restrictions against sporting events prior to noon on the Lord's Day. The NHL announced that if that occurred, the entire match would be replayed later in the week, probably on Tuesday. Now let's go back to the earlier YouTube video that I had in the Substack article for the Game 7 highlights. Here's my commentary on Game 7 with the timestamps from the video. At the 7-minute mark, you see the opening face-off of Game 7. At 7:25 minutes on the tape, 7 minutes and 25 seconds on the tape, just 3 minutes into the game, Maple Leafs' Andy Bathgate gets the puck on a breakaway and scores to give Toronto the early 1-0 lead. The score remains 1-0 after the first period. At 8:05 on the tape, watch as Red Wings goalie Terry Sawchuck makes a couple of outstanding saves to keep the Red Wings down by just a single goal after 2 periods at 1-0. At the 8:20 mark on the tape, Sawchuck makes another great save in the early going of the third period. It's still 1-0 Toronto. At 8:35 on the tape, just over 4 minutes into the third period, Sawchuck's luck runs out as Dave Keon scores to make it 2-0 Toronto. At the 8:50 mark on the tape, just a minute later in the match, Frank Mahovlich gets the puck to Red Kelly, who puts it into the net, and Toronto takes a 3-0 lead with 15 minutes to play in the match. Kelly is playing in his 142nd Stanley Cup playoff game, which is a new record. At 9:25 on the tape, the match ends. The Toronto Maple Leafs are the Stanley Cup champions for the third straight season. The front page of the Toronto Star today, April 27, 1964, reported that on Saturday night, after the Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup, quote, champagne flowed in a dressing room crowded with well-wishers, Prime Minister Lester Pearson among them. A wonderful, wonderful game, said Leaf fan Pearson. The Stanley Cup victory was the 10th for Toronto, tying them with the Montreal Canadiens for the most Stanley Cups won in NHL history. Closing comment from the Sports Time Traveler. After the experience I had at a preseason Maple Leafs match in 2014, I can only begin to imagine the extent of the pandemonium that must have swept over Maple Leaf Gardens a little before midnight on Saturday, April 25th, 1964, when the Toronto Maple Leafs won their third consecutive Stanley Cup. Thanks for reading, and please share the Sports Time Traveler.